Lori Townsend, welcome to the Native News Update at IndianCountryTV.com. We're speaking to you from Anchorage, Alaska, and I'd like to give you an update on some of the things that your association there has been reporting on coming out of the Alaska Native community, the AFN. Tell us what happened.
Hi, Paul. Good afternoon. Yes, AFN, the Alaska Federation of Natives, had their annual convention October 20th through the 22nd. It's always a fantastic event. Thousands of folks come from around the state. It's billed as the largest gathering of Native people in the United States every year. And so it's a good time for political, cultural, social events to happen. This year there was a lot of talk about the relationship of tribes and corporations with the state and federal governments. And so they held panel discussions on this issue about strengthening those relationships. And there's a little bit of back and forth between some of the tribal representatives and some of the corporation heads about what the proper role should be between tribal management and corporation management. The Alaska Native corporations have control of tribal land resources, and there is kind of some growing concern among some of the tribal leaders about the opportunities that may happen in the future and what they would like to see happen with this land, having more control over it, and also making sure that they retain the land into the future. So there's been a call by some tribal representatives. The Alaska Intertribal Council Executive Director David Harrison is saying that the tribes need more control over these land resources so that the corporations can do what they're supposed to, which is economic development, but that the tribes have control of the land so that if the corporations get into a bad financial situation where they might have bankruptcy or something happen, that they don't end up losing that land for future generations. Also the shareholder issue is a growing concern because children after 1971 were left off, and so they weren't considered part of the original shareholders. And so in the future, there will be gradually less and less shareholders unless this is rectified. Some of the corporations have dealt with it, but not all of them. So that was a big issue.
Yeah, they can't pass their airship stock rights to that corporation down, or is that kind of a undefined area?
They can, but there's different rules depending on what the corporations, each corporation deals with it a little bit differently. But parents can gift children and grandchildren some of their shares, but the voting rights are different. And so a lot of people want younger Alaska Natives to be added to these roles so that they have full voting rights.
Sure.
And protect that into the future.
Certainly the voters are going to be aging and they want some younger people in there. How long ago was the Claims Act settled? Tell people how long ago it was, because this relationship and how things are set up between tribe, corporation, federal government, and state is pretty new. How old is that?
It's 40 years this year. It was 1971 that the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act came into being. And it was, there was a lot of things going on then. They were trying to get right-of-ways for the oil pipeline and development on the North Slope, and so they were trying to settle land claims and the concerns that Native people had about being able to hunt and fish into the future. The hunting and fishing rights were extinguished by ANCSA, but were put back in, there was protections put back in place in the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act that came some years later. But it's still kind of there's concern about how that will look in the future, and people want to revisit that, reopen ANCSA. Some tribal advocates are calling for amending ANCSA. It's been amended in the past, but they're calling for amendments now that they say will benefit tribal members, not the corporations.
Right. So lots of discussion at AFN about that relationship. Are there other kinds of issues that emerged during the AFN that you heard of?
Yes, I went to cover one panel that was on tribal vets and their accessing services through the Veterans Administration. And both our U.S. senators were there, Mark Begich, who sits on the Armed Services Committee, and Lisa Murkowski, who's on the Indian Affairs Committee. And they had the Deputy Undersecretary Mr. Garcia. I think his first name was David, but I'm not completely sure about that. He's the deputy secretary of the VA under Shinseki. They also had the head of the state. Alaska VA was here, Alaska VA Health Services executive director, and a lot of the support staff. So they had all the right people in the room. I thought that that was a good sign that they had all of these people who could immediately take names, because there were some horrific stories that Native vets stood up and told. One man said that he flew here from Nome to go to a VA appointment. He misplaced his VA card, went to the VA hospital, and they wouldn't see him, even though he said, I had them call up my information. I'm in the system. My picture's right there. I'm standing here, and they wouldn't see him. And he said, I won't go back until I get an apology. He was very upset. He said he'd been to VA all over the country and had had good service. And he said they told him at the VA, well, go to the Native hospital. You're Native. You can get seen there. And he said, I want to go to the VA. I earned my right to go to the VA. I can go to the Native hospital because of who I was born as. But I've earned my right to use VA services, and I want to use those. And I always have in the past, but I won't go back until I get an apology. And the head of the VA stood right up right then and said, sir, I apologize. I will handle this personally. There was another man who stood up and said he'd fought for his disability rights for years, finally got them. 3 years after he started getting them, he was suddenly told he owed the VA $24,000. He was so upset that he just started to cry. He just couldn't go on, and his wife tried to speak about it, and she was so upset as well that they just really couldn't even talk about it. It was so upsetting to them. They were obviously people that didn't have a lot of financial means, and they were very, very devastated by this. So the right people were in the room, though. So it was a good hearing. We heard issues about homelessness and a lot of problems that vets are struggling with, especially in rural Alaska.
Well, certainly people are struggling everywhere, and you're going to have a huge influx of Native veterans coming back into the system again because of both the Afghanistan and Iraqi war. This stuff has been going on for 10 years now, and there's a whole lot of people in the pipeline, so a whole nother generation. So hopefully, if they've learned anything from dealing with veterans, is you got to deal with veterans. They've earned their
That's right.
rights. And
Yes, they have.
um, housing too. Housing across the country is in a precarious position. I mean, there's houses empty, and there's people living in tents and woods, and it's getting to be winter. And I think for the first time, what does Alaska do for housing?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because another vet stood up at this gathering, and she held a whole raft of papers in her hand that she said were the regulations about housing. She had financing through the VA. There had been some trouble. She had served in the Middle East. She got sick, was diagnosed with cancer, fell behind on her mortgage payments, and was told that there was a VA loan modification program that she'd been approved for, so that she was supposed to wait and hear about that. In the meantime, she got foreclosed on. State troopers came, kicked her. She said the troopers put me, my handicapped daughter, and my son out on our porch. And she said, I'm holding all the regulations right here, and they broke every one in the way that they handled my case. And she said, my house is still sitting empty, and we're homeless. And so there were some pretty kind of heartbreaking stories at this gathering. But there were, as I mentioned, people there that were willing to take it up. And Garcia seemed like a real straightforward guy, and he just said, that's why I'm here, because these things should not be happening to veterans.
Right.
And I will look into these myself and make sure that we get this taken care of.
Aren't these kind of incidents kind of almost justification for letting these officials get out and talk to people face to face in groups? Get out in the country and see what's going on here. Otherwise, you're not going to know what people are suffering through. And there's a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one thing that Ted Stevens did a lot of, and he kind of took some grief for it at times, because people would say, well, Senator Stevens is just bringing officials from DC up here to go on deluxe fishing trips. And of course that happened too. They did go on fishing trips and do tourist things around the state, but they also got out and saw what rural Alaska was like, saw what people were dealing with infrastructure, a lack of water and sewer in still so many homes, a lack of infrastructure and road access to hospitals. So they understood the need for runways and proper lighting so that people could be flown out in emergency settings, and really gain a new understanding of what we're dealing with in Alaska when it comes to remote communities. And so Ted Stevens started that, and now Mark Begich and Lisa Murkowski are doing some of the same things. We saw that during AFN. One of the things that Senator Begich said at the end of it, was that he would like the VA at the next AFN gathering to set up a station where people can come and get their problems resolved right there, so that folks in villages that might have trouble getting online and accessing what they need to get signed up for different benefits could do that right at AFN. And he got commitment that they would definitely make that happen for next year.
Right. Well, good. And let's we only got a few minutes left. We're going to cut through this, but we're going to say this: song and dance, food, vendors, artwork, family networking, everything else. It's a huge operation, and everyone looks forward to it every year, don't they?
Yes, it's a fantastic event. Beautiful arts, crafts, wonderful dancing. It's a great time. You see a lot of friends. It's a wonderful time. So AFN is done for the year, but they're already making plans for next year.
Yeah. You lost an elder. Tell us a little bit about this Yupik elder, Marianne. Marianne? Okay.
Marianne Sundown, yes.
Okay.
From Scammon Bay, out western Alaska, close to the Bering Sea area and the YK, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region. Very, very well known for her dancing and her kind of modern day interpretations of old dances. She did a lot of humorous dances. She invented her version of the Macarena. She had a dance called the Mosquito Dance, very, very animated and kind of unusual, I understand, for some of the Yupik dancers aren't usually that expressive, but she really was and had a lot of fun and encouraged people to get up there and dance. She died last Wednesday, I think it was the 26th. She had pneumonia. She told her son in Yupik, "Be good," and he took that to mean that she realized she wasn't going to come back from this illness. She was at least 93, although they're not completely sure how old she really was.
Some of those elders know how to keep good secrets, That's for sure.
Yeah, a beautiful human being, and she'll certainly be missed.
Yeah. And you mentioned one thing a little bit earlier, this ring seals. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, there's disturbing new information in the Arctic about skin lesions and some sort of a virus or a bacteria that they're seeing in ring seals. They're seeing something similar in walrus. But there's a lot of labs in the US and Canada working on this, and they don't know what it is. If it's an emerging pathogen, they're not sure. They don't know if it's a virus or a bacteria, although one researcher is leaning to a virus. She thinks that it's probably the same condition in walrus that they're seeing as in the seals, but they're getting lesions. It looks almost like rug burns, small lesions around their eyes, on their bodies, on their skin. And the seals, there's been dozens of seals that have died from it. They're not sure about if walrus deaths can be attributed to this yet or not. But the seals have emphysema. When they do necropsies on them, they're finding their lungs have been impacted, their liver, there's internal bleeding. So this is very, very serious, and they don't know what it is or what's causing it at this point in time.
Perhaps some kind of a new virus or something related to increasing temperatures in your region?
It's possible. They're just not sure if it's as a result of climate change or if it's just some new disease that they don't know the cause of yet. So far, they're unable to determine what's causing it.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining with us today. Give us the URL for where we can connect with some of these stories that you've been covering.
You can find all of those stories and more at alaskapublic.org. And I just wanted to also say that we have snow. It's coming down like crazy, and it has been for a couple of days now. So,
well, we're in northern Wisconsin.
Winter in Alaska.
It's winter in Colorado, and it's been winter on the East Coast. But in northern Wisconsin, so far we've had two little snow showers. We're looking forward. Thanks for joining with us again, Lori.
Thanks, Paul.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to say miigwech for joining with us. Come back again soon.